The abandoned church had been silent for 300 years, until the night a rejected Omega's broken lullaby drifted through its shattered windows and stopped 3 royal hearts from failing. Rain hammered the thatched roof of Ilara's cottage like fists demanding entry. She pressed her palm against the damp wall and felt the old structure shudder. 3 years she'd lived in this forgotten corner of the kingdom, healing villagers with herbs and poultices, pretending she was nothing more than what she appeared to be. 3 years since Marcus had looked at her before the entire Silverfang pack, curled his lip in disgust, and spoken the words that had carved themselves into her bones. I reject this bond. I reject this Omega. She'd stopped crying about it 2 years ago, stopped feeling much of anything a year after that. The storm howled like a wounded beast outside her window. Lightning split the sky, and in its brief illumination, she saw the old church on the hill, St. Aldrich's they'd called it once, before the humans abandoned this territory and the wolves claimed it for their own. Its spire had collapsed decades ago. Its windows gaped like empty eye sockets. No one went there anymore, which was why the flicker of light inside its walls made no sense at all. Ilara pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. There, again. A faint golden glow pulsing weakly behind those ruined walls. Not your concern, she told herself. Whatever fool is out in this storm deserves what they get. But her wolf, that quiet, wounded creature that had retreated deep inside her after the rejection, stirred for the first time in months. Something was wrong. Something that called to the part of her she'd spent years trying to bury. She grabbed her cloak before she could talk herself out of it. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet the moment she stepped outside. Rain lashed her face and soaked through her clothes in seconds. The path up to the church had been reclaimed by wild grass and thorn bushes, but Ilara pushed through them, barely feeling the scratches on her hands and arms. The closer she got, the stronger the pull became. Like a rope had been tied around her ribs, and someone was tugging, insistent and desperate. The church doors hung from their hinges, one torn away entirely. Ilara stepped inside and froze. 3 children lay on the cracked stone floor, huddled together like abandoned puppies. They couldn't have been older than 4, identical faces pale as milk. Dark hair matted with sweat and rain. Their small bodies trembled with fever, and even from the doorway Ilara could smell the sickness radiating from them. Not a human illness. Something worse. Their wolves were dying inside them, slowly suffocating under the weight of whatever poison or curse had taken hold. She dropped to her knees beside them without thinking. Her healer's hands moved automatically, pressing against foreheads and wrists, checking pulses and temperatures. Too hot. All of them. Their heartbeats were thready, uneven, stuttering like candles about to gutter out. "Who left you here?" she whispered. "Who would do this?" One of the boys, the smallest, she thought, though they were so similar it was hard to tell, opened his eyes. They were pale gold, flickering with the last remnants of his wolf's light. Mama said, "Hide," he managed through cracked lips. "Bad men, coming." Ilara's hands went cold. She looked more closely at their clothing, torn and filthy now, but unmistakably fine. And there, barely visible beneath layers of mud and rain, a crest embroidered in silver thread. 3 wolves beneath a crown. The royal sigil. Her heart stopped. These weren't just children. These were the children. The Alpha King's triplets, his only heirs, the princes the entire kingdom believed were safely tucked behind the impenetrable walls of the palace. Their mother, the Luna, had died giving birth to them. The king had reportedly become a recluse since then, seen rarely, spoken of only in whispers. And now his sons were dying in her arms in an abandoned church miles from the capital. "Run," a voice screamed in her head. "You know what happens to Omegas who get involved in royal affairs. You know what they do to ones like you." She did know. Omegas with gifts, with powers beyond the ordinary, were hunted, captured, and sold to the highest bidder. Kings and lords and wealthy alphas who wanted to own something rare, something they could use. Her mother had died protecting her secret. Her father had gone to his grave, never knowing what his daughter could do. If she healed these children, truly healed them, they would know. They would feel the bond that formed when her gift touched their souls. And they would talk. The smallest boy's eyes fluttered closed. His breathing grew shallow. "Leave them," the scared part of her begged. "Someone will find them. The guards must be searching." But she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of her wolf's instinct, that no one would reach them in time. Not through this storm, not with the sickness spreading through their small bodies like wildfire. By morning, all 3 princes would be dead. Ilara closed her eyes. She'd never forgive herself. She opened her mouth and she sang. It started quietly, barely more than a hum, a melody without words that her mother used to sing to her when she was small. But as the sound built, it changed. Golden light bloomed behind her eyelids, spreading outward from her chest like ripples in still water. The song wrapped around the children, sinking into their skin, their blood, their bones. She felt their wolves, weak and fading, respond to her voice like flowers turning toward the sun. "Come back," she sang without words. "You're not done yet. Come back to them." The smallest boy's wolf stirred first, a tiny flame that had nearly gone out rekindling into something stronger. Then his brothers, their wolves roaring back to life in a cascade of golden warmth. Ilara sang until her throat ached, until tears streamed down her face, until she felt something she hadn't felt in years, the fierce protective love of a wolf who had found someone worth protecting. But with the healing came something else, something she hadn't expected. Bonds. 3 of them, delicate as spider silk, winding from her heart to theirs. Not mate bonds, something different, older. The kind of connection that existed before alphas and omegas learned to call each other by different names. A claiming without romance, a devotion without condition. No, she thought, even as the bonds settled into place. No, no, no. The smallest boy opened his eyes again. The gold was stronger now, bright with life. He smiled at her, a trusting, innocent smile that shattered something inside her chest. "You sing pretty," he whispered. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. By dawn, the storm had passed. Ilara sat with her back against the altar, all 3 boys curled against her like a litter of pups. They'd woken briefly throughout the night, confused and frightened, but her voice had soothed them each time. They didn't seem to remember how they'd gotten here, or who had brought them. Just fragments, their mother's lady-in-waiting waking them in the darkness, carrying them through secret passages, whispering that she was taking them somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. An abandoned church in the middle of nowhere, where 3 royal children had nearly died. Someone had tried to kill them. Someone close enough to the royal family to know the palace's secrets. The sound of hooves reached her ears. Ilara's blood turned to ice. She pulled the children closer, cursing herself for not running when she had the chance. But even as she thought it, she knew she couldn't have left them. Not after what she'd done. Not with those bonds pulsing warm and insistent beneath her ribs. The horses stopped outside. Boots hit the ground, many of them, and voices barked orders in clipped military tones. Then the ruined doors were thrown wide, and warriors poured inside. They were the king's elite guard. She recognized their black armor, the silver wolves etched into their breastplates. They surrounded her within seconds, their swords drawn, their eyes hard with suspicion and barely leashed violence. "Don't move, Omega," the captain growled. "And don't think about—" "Let me through." The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. The guards parted instantly, and Ilara looked up into the face of the Alpha King. She'd seen paintings of him, of course. Every village had at least one hanging in the meeting hall, formal portraits that showed a stern, handsome alpha in ceremonial robes. But the paintings hadn't captured the raw power that radiated from him, like heat from a forge. His dark hair was wild, uncombed, his jaw shadowed with several days' growth. His eyes were black, not dark brown, but true black, his wolf so close to the surface that it had swallowed everything else. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, like a man who had been tearing apart the kingdom searching for something precious, like a man who had found it in the arms of a stranger. "Papa!" The smallest boy woke with a cry, struggling to his feet and reaching for his father. The other two stirred, making similar sounds of joy and relief. But Elara didn't release them. Couldn't, somehow. The king's black gaze fixed on her face. She watched him take in the picture she made, a dishevelled Omega in a rain-soaked cloak, his children clinging to her like she was their salvation. She watched his nostrils flare as he scented the air, likely catching the unmistakable traces of her power still lingering in the church. She watched his expression shift from desperate hope to cold, lethal suspicion. In one fluid motion, he crossed the space between them, grabbed her by the throat, and pressed a blade against the vulnerable skin beneath her jaw. "What?" he said, each word dripping with menace. "Have you done to my sons?" Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. The blade bit into Elara's throat, not deep enough to draw blood, but enough to make her point abundantly clear. One wrong move and she'd be bleeding out on the church's cracked stone floor. She should have been terrified. Any sensible Omega would have submitted immediately, bared her throat in supplication, and begged for mercy. But something had shifted inside her during the long night of singing his children back from death's door. Those 3 delicate bonds pulsing beneath her ribs had awakened a part of her wolf she'd thought Marcus's rejection had killed forever. She met the Alpha King's black eyes without flinching. "If you want to know what I did to your sons," she said, her voice steady despite the steel against her skin, "I suggest you remove your blade and ask them yourself. They're frightened enough without watching their father murder the woman who saved their lives." Silence crashed through the ruined church like a physical force. The guards shifted uneasily, their wolves clearly unsettled by an Omega who didn't know her place. But Elara kept her gaze locked on the king's face, watching the war playing out behind those midnight eyes. "Papa." The smallest triplet, she still didn't know their names, tugged at his father's cloak with small, insistent hands. "Papa, don't hurt her. She sang the bad dreams away. She made the fire in my chest go out." The king's grip on his blade wavered, just slightly, but enough for Elara to see. "Ronan," he said, and his voice cracked on the name. You're all right?" "We're all right now," another of the boys said, this one with a slightly deeper voice than his brother's. "The lady fixed us. Her voice is made of gold, Papa. Real gold. I saw it." The blade withdrew from Elara's throat. She didn't move, didn't dare breathe, as the Alpha King fell to his knees before his children. The raw anguish that transformed his face in that moment was almost too intimate to witness. The crumbling of walls that had clearly been holding back an ocean of terror and grief. He gathered all 3 boys into his arms, crushing them against his chest like he was afraid they might dissolve into mist. His massive shoulders shook. No sound escaped him, but Elara could smell the salt of tears he was too proud to shed in front of his men. 3 weeks, he rasped into their hair. 3 weeks I've been searching. I thought... He couldn't finish the sentence. Elara's heart clenched despite herself. Whatever else this man was, king, alpha, the most powerful wolf in the realm, in this moment, he was simply a father who had believed his children were lost forever. "Your Majesty." The captain of the guard stepped forward, his expression caught between relief and suspicion. "The Omega. We should question her properly. Find out how she came to have the princes, what she's done to... She saved them." The king's voice had gone cold again, but this time the ice wasn't directed at Elara. He rose to his feet, keeping his sons close, and fixed his captain with a look that could have frozen the sun. "My children were dying when she found them," She healed them. Unless you'd prefer I punish her for that. No, Your Majesty, of course not. But the circumstances are unusual. The circumstances are a nightmare. The king's gaze swept the church, taking in the rotten timbers, the shattered windows, the rain still dripping through holes in the roof. Someone brought my sons here and left them to die. That is the mystery that requires solving, not why a healer chose to heal. His eyes found Ilara's again. She saw questions there, dozens of them, burning behind the careful mask of royal composure. He knew something wasn't normal about what she'd done. His wolf knew. But he was choosing, for now, not to press. "You'll come with us to the palace," he said. It wasn't a request. "My physician will need to examine the children, and you'll need to explain exactly what condition you found them in. Every detail." Ilara's stomach dropped. The palace. Surrounded by wolves who would smell her difference, who would sense the power she'd tried so hard to hide. This was everything she'd spent 3 years running from. But the triplets were watching her with those wide golden eyes, and she felt the bonds between them pulse with wordless need. They trusted her. They'd claimed her in their own innocent way, and walking away now would feel like tearing out a piece of her own soul. "Fine," she said. "But someone needs to send word to my village. I have patients who depend on me." The king's eyebrow rose slightly, perhaps surprised that a ragged Omega would dare to make demands, but he nodded to one of his guards, who immediately peeled away from the group. "It will be done. Now come. We've wasted enough time already." The ride to the palace took most of the day. Ilara had expected to be thrown on a horse and forgotten, but the smallest triplet, Ronan she now knew, had refused to let go of her hand. His brothers, Caspian and Dorian, had taken up positions on either side of her, their small bodies pressed against hers like she was a shield against the world. The king had watched this development with an unreadable expression before ordering that she ride in the enclosed carriage with the children. A kindness, perhaps, or simply practicality. Either way, Ilara found herself rattling along the forest road with 3 small princes using her as a pillow. They slept for most of the journey. Whatever strength they'd regained from her healing, their bodies were still exhausted from fighting off the poison. Ilara kept one hand on Ronan's forehead, monitoring his temperature, while her mind raced through everything she'd learned. 3 weeks missing. The queen vanished with them, and the kingdom believed she'd fled with a lover. But these children hadn't been running away with their mother. They'd been abandoned, poisoned, left to die in a place no one would think to look. What kind of mother did that to her own sons? The carriage lurched to a stop. Ilara heard shouting outside, voices raised in shock and joy, and then the door was wrenched open to reveal the palace courtyard, packed with servants and nobles who had apparently been waiting for news. The king dismounted from his horse and immediately moved to the carriage, lifting Ronan into his arms with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his intimidating frame. Servants rushed forward to take Caspian and Dorian, but both boys shrank back, reaching for Ilara. "No," Caspian said firmly. "We want to stay with the singing lady." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Ilara felt dozens of eyes turned toward her, assessing, suspicious, curious. She was acutely aware of her appearance: rain-stained cloak, mud-caked boots, hair tangled from a night of singing and a day of travel. She looked like a beggar, not someone fit to touch royal children. "Your Highnesses," a severe-looking woman in grey silk stepped forward, her tone dripping with barely concealed condescension. "You must come with the nurses now. You need baths and proper meals and—" "No!" Dorian's voice rose to a shriek. "No, no, no! Don't take us away from her, don't—" His brothers joined the chorus. All 3 boys suddenly screaming like they were being torn apart. The sound was raw and terrible, the wails of children who had already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose anything else. The king's face went pale. "Enough!" he barked at the woman in grey. "Can't you see you're frightening them?" "Your Majesty, the protocols—" "Damn the protocols." He turned to Ilara, and she saw something like desperation flickering in his dark eyes. "Can you calm them?" "Whatever you did before." She didn't wait for him to finish. She climbed out of the carriage and gathered all 3 boys against her, one arm around Caspian, the other around Dorian, while Ronan pressed his face into her stomach. Then she hummed, just a soft, simple melody, nothing that would reveal the true nature of her gift, and felt their screams dissolve into hiccuping sobs. "It's all right," she murmured. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf in that courtyard stood frozen, watching a ragged Omega soothe the royal princes with nothing more than her voice and her presence. The king stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Physician," he said finally, his voice rough. "Now, and someone show this woman to a guest chamber. She's staying." The royal physician was a grey-haired beater named Aldrich, who smelled like herbs and old paper. He examined the triplets with gentle efficiency, while Ilara stood in the corner of the royal nursery, trying to make herself invisible. She'd been given fresh clothes, a simple blue dress that was nicer than anything she'd owned in years, and a chance to wash the mud from her face and hands. But she still felt like an intruder, a fox who'd somehow wandered into a den of wolves and was waiting to be torn apart. The king stood by the window, his arms crossed over his broad chest, watching Aldrich work with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey. He'd changed out of his travelling clothes into a black doublet that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the hard planes of his face. He looked every inch the tyrant the rumours described. But Ilara had seen him weep into his children's hair. She'd watched him gentle his voice to calm their fears, seen him look at them like they were the only thing in the world that mattered. Whatever else he was, he loved those boys with a ferocity that bordered on madness. "Wolfsbane oil," Aldrich announced, straightening from his examination with a grim expression. "Administered in small, regular doses over several days. It's a slow killer, would have presented as a wasting illness, a failure of the wolf spirit to thrive. By the time anyone realized it wasn't natural, it would have been too late." The king's hands curled into fists. "You're certain?" "The residue is still in their blood. I can smell it." Aldrich's eyes moved to Ilara. "What I can't explain is how they're still alive. Wolfsbane oil at this concentration should have killed them days ago. Their wolves should be damaged beyond repair. Instead, they're healthy. Stronger than they should be, actually." He paused. "What exactly did you do, girl?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Ilara's throat went dry. She could lie, claim she'd used some herb or poultice the physician wasn't familiar with, but Aldrich would know. He'd been healing wolves for decades. He would see through any deception in moments. "I sang to them," she said quietly. "I have a gift. My voice can heal." Silence. Then Aldrich let out a low whistle. "A voice healer. I thought your kind were extinct. There aren't many of us left. Most had been hunted down generations ago, captured and forced to serve noble houses until their gifts burned out and their masters discarded them. Ilara's mother had been one of the few who'd escaped that fate, and she'd made her daughter swear to never ever reveal what she could do. So much for that promise. The king moved away from the window, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He stopped in front of Ilara, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This close. She could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the shadows beneath his eyes, the lines of grief around his mouth. "A voice healer," he repeated, living as a village herbalist in the middle of nowhere. Hiding. "Yes. Why?" "Because I've seen what happens to Omegas with gifts. We become property, prizes, tools to be used until there's nothing left." She met his gaze without flinching. "I would rather die free than live as a possession." Something flickered in the king's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "And yet you healed my sons, knowing it would expose you." "They were children. They were dying. She lifted her chin. What was I supposed to do? Walk away and let them suffer because protecting myself was more important? Most would have. Then most are cowards. The word hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. For a long moment the king simply looked at her, looked into her, his wolf assessing her wolf with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. You have a dangerous tongue, Omega. So I've been told. He turned away from her, moving to where his sons sat on a massive bed piled with silk pillows. All three were watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes. Ronan reached for his father's hand and held it tight. Papa, he said, can the singing lady stay? She makes the bad feelings go away. The king's face softened in that way Elara was beginning to recognize, the dropping of armor, the emergence of the father beneath the ruler. We'll see, he said gently. First, I need you to tell me everything you remember about how you got to that church. Can you do that for me? The boys exchanged glances, the silent communication of triplets who shared everything, even thoughts. Then Caspian, the one who seemed to be the natural spokesman for the group, began to speak. Lady Helene woke us up. It was dark and cold. She said Mama wanted us to go on an adventure, but we had to be very quiet. We went through the secret passages, the ones behind the paintings. She put us in a carriage. Lady Helene? The king's voice had gone very still. Your mother's handmaiden? Yes. She gave us milk. It tasted funny, but she said we had to drink it all or Mama would be sad. Then, Caspian's brow furrowed. Then I felt sick. We all felt sick. And she left us in the old building and said someone would come for us soon, but nobody came until the singing lady. Elara watched the king's face transform. The softness vanished, replaced by something cold and terrible, a rage so profound it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. Helene acted on your mother's orders, he said. Not a question. Caspian nodded miserably. Mama told her to. She said we were going somewhere better, that we wouldn't have to be princes anymore. He looked up at his father with confusion written across his small features. But I like being a prince. I don't want to be somewhere better. The king pulled all three boys against him, pressing kisses to their foreheads one by one. You're not going anywhere, he promised. You're staying here with me, where no one will ever hurt you again. But his eyes, when they met Elara's over his children's heads, told a different story. They were the eyes of a man who had just realized the depths of a betrayal he'd only begun to understand. Later that night, after the triplets had finally fallen asleep in a tangle of limbs on their enormous bed, Elara was summoned to the king's private study. She found him standing before a roaring fire, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring into the flames like they held answers to questions she couldn't hear. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he was aware of her, his wolf tracking her movements with predatory precision. You asked what I was supposed to do, he said finally. When I found my children in your arms, you asked why I put a blade to your throat instead of thanking you. I understood, she said quietly. You didn't know who I was. You were terrified. I was. He turned to face her, and she saw the toll the last few weeks had taken, the weight loss, the sleeplessness, the grief. 3 weeks ago, I woke to find my mate and my children gone. No note, no explanation, just empty beds and a kingdom full of whispers. The rumors said she fled with a lover. The rumors were wrong. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Serafina didn't love anyone enough to flee for them. She didn't love anyone at all, as it turns out. Not me. Not our sons. Our bond was arranged, a political alliance between packs. I thought, given time, affection might grow. His jaw tightened. I was a fool. Elara didn't know what to say. She'd spent 3 years nursing her own wounds from a mate who'd rejected her. But at least Marcus had been honest about his disgust. At least she hadn't been deceived into believing he cared. My sources finally tracked her down 2 days ago. the king continued. She's with the Shadow Vale Pack, across the northern border. She traded our children for dark magic, a ritual that would sever our mate bond and give her power beyond anything she could claim as Luna. The air left Ilara's lungs. She sold them? She sold them to die. His voice was ice. The ritual requires the blood of 3 royal wolves, freely given or violently taken. She couldn't kill them herself. Even her black heart couldn't manage that. So she arranged for Helene to do it. Poison them slowly, make it look like illness, dispose of the bodies where they'd never be found. Ilara thought of the 3 small boys sleeping upstairs, their golden eyes, their innocent trust, the way they'd reached for her in the darkness of that ruined church. Someone had wanted them dead. Their own mother had wanted them dead. "You can't let her get away with this," she said. "I don't intend to." The king set down his glass with careful precision. "But there's a complication. Aldrich believes the wolfsbane was only part of it. The ritual Seraphina bought requires a curse to be placed on the sacrifices, a curse that ensures their blood carries the right magical signature. My sons aren't just recovering from poison, they're fighting something darker." Ilara's stomach clenched. A curse? It's still active, still working inside them, waiting to be triggered. The ritual must be completed by the next blood moon, 3 weeks from now, or Seraphina loses everything she bargained for. His dark eyes held hers. She'll come back for them. She has to. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to break a curse Ilara didn't understand, cast by magic she'd never encountered, while a mad queen plotted to murder her own children. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because my sons won't let anyone else near them." He stepped closer and she caught his scent for the first time, pine and storm clouds and something darker underneath, a wildness barely contained. "They scream when the nurses try to touch them. They cry when I leave the room for more than a few minutes. The only time they've been calm since you healed them is when you're there." "The bonds," Ilara whispered. "When I healed them, I bound myself to them. I didn't mean to. It just happened. It's part of how my gift works." "I know." His expression was unreadable. "Aldrich explained it to me. He also said the bond works both ways. They need you. But you need them too. Walking away would hurt you as much as it would hurt them." She hadn't let herself think about that. Hadn't wanted to acknowledge the way her wolf settled into contentment when the boys were near, the way their absence already felt like a missing limb. "I'm offering you a position," the king said. "The children's caretaker. You would live in the palace, have full access to them, and be protected by the crown. In exchange, you would help me keep them safe until we can break this curse." "And after?" She forced the words out past the lump in her throat. "When the curse is broken and they don't need me anymore?" Something shifted in his face, something that might have been pain. "Then you would be free to go, with enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of your life and my eternal gratitude." He paused. "Unless you chose to stay." It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. She was bound to those boys as surely as if they were her own pups. Leaving them would tear her apart. "Fine," she said, "I'll stay." The king nodded once, something like relief flickering across his features before the mask of royal composure slammed back into place. "Aldrich will begin researching the curse tomorrow. You'll have full access to the library and any resources you need." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing, Omega." "Ilara," she corrected. "My name is Ilara." Another flicker of that almost smile. "Ilara, then. Whatever happens in the coming weeks, whatever dangers we face, you're under my protection now. Anyone who threatens you answers to me. Understood?" She didn't know what to say to that. 3 years ago, she'd been thrown out of her pack like garbage, told she wasn't worthy of the alpha who'd been destined for her. Now the most powerful wolf in the realm was promising to protect her. The world had gone utterly mad. She nodded, and he left her standing alone in his study, staring at the fire and wondering what she'd gotten herself into. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Ilara had been given a chamber connected to the royal nursery by a private door, close enough that she could reach the triplets in seconds if they needed her. The room was larger than her entire cottage had been, filled with furniture that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life as a healer. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt like a bird in a gilded cage. She was still lying awake, staring at the canopy above her bed when she heard the whimpering. She was through the connecting door before her mind caught up with her body. The nursery was dark save for a single candle burning by the window, but she could see the triplets clearly, all three tangled together in their bed, all three caught in the grip of nightmares. Ronan was crying in his sleep, his small body trembling. As Ilara approached, she heard him mumbling, the words barely audible. Mama said. She sat on the edge of the bed and gathered him into her arms, humming softly. The other two boys stirred, pressing closer to her warmth, their faces relaxing as her voice wrapped around them. Shh, she murmured. You're safe. I'm here. Ronan's eyes fluttered open, those pale gold eyes that had looked at her with such trust in the ruined church. For a moment he seemed caught between sleeping and waking, his gaze unfocused, his voice dreamy. The singing lady came, he whispered. Just like Mama said. Ilara's blood turned to ice in her veins. What do you mean, sweetheart? What did Mama say? Ronan's eyes drifted closed again, his voice fading as sleep reclaimed him. Mama said the singing lady would come. Mama said to make sure she stays. Then he was asleep, his breathing even and peaceful, utterly unaware that his words had just shattered everything Ilara thought she understood. She sat frozen in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs, while a terrible realization crept over her. Serafina had known she would come. Serafina had planned for her. This wasn't chance or fate or coincidence. Somehow, in some way, Ilara couldn't begin to understand. She had been part of the Mad Queen's scheme all along. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. Ilara didn't sleep for what remained of the night. She sat in the nursery's window seat, watching the sky shift from black to grey to the pale pink of dawn, while Ronan's whispered words played on an endless loop in her mind. Mama said the singing lady would come. Mama said to make sure she stays. It could have been nothing. The confused murmurings of a traumatized child, mixing nightmares with fragments of overheard conversations. Children said strange things all the time, but Ilara's wolf knew better. That instinct that had kept her alive through 3 years of exile, through the rejection that had shattered her world, through all the careful hiding and running and pretending to be less than she was, that instinct was screaming at her now. This was not coincidence. She traced back through the events that had led her to this moment, examining each one with new eyes. Her bonding ceremony 3 years ago, when Marcus had rejected her before the entire pack. The elders' decision to exile her to the village on the kingdom's edge, not killed, not imprisoned, just placed, like a chess piece being moved into position. The cottage she'd been given sat less than a mile from St. Aldrich's church. She'd walked past those ruins 100 times and never thought to go inside, until the night 3 royal children were left there to die. Who chose that village for me, she wondered. Who decided I should live within walking distance of an abandoned church? The answers she came up with made her stomach turn. When the triplets woke, she fed them breakfast and smiled at their chatter about the birds outside the window, the softness of their new pillows, the way the morning light made rainbows on the walls. She answered their questions about whether she would stay forever, whether she liked honey cakes, whether her wolf was pretty. She braided Ronan's hair when he asked her to, even though boys didn't usually wear braids, because he said it made him feel fancy. And all the while her mind raced. She needed to talk to the king. Finding Kaelin alone proved more difficult than she'd expected. The palace was a maze of corridors and courtyards, filled with servants who eyed her with suspicion and nobles who pretended she didn't exist. She was an Omega in a wolf's den, tolerated for now but clearly not welcome. Every whispered conversation died when she approached. Every cluster of courtiers seemed to find pressing business elsewhere when she drew near. Finally, she cornered one of the king's guards outside his private study and demanded an audience. "His Majesty is in council," the guard said, his voice carefully neutral. "He cannot be disturbed." "Then I'll wait." She planted herself on a bench across the hall and refused to move. The guard exchanged looks with his partner but didn't try to make her leave. Perhaps he'd heard about the scene in the courtyard yesterday, the Omega who had calmed the screaming princes when no one else could. Perhaps he was simply tired and didn't want the hassle. Either way, she waited. 2 hours. 3. Servants passed by with trays of food and pitchers of wine. Nobles emerged from various doors, casting curious glances her way before hurrying on. The sun climbed higher, streaming through the windows in golden shafts that warmed her face and made her eyelids heavy. She was nearly dozing when the study door finally opened and Kaelin emerged. He looked worse than he had yesterday, if that was possible. The shadows under his eyes had deepened to bruises, and there was a tightness around his mouth that spoke of barely contained frustration. Behind him she glimpsed a long table surrounded by grey-haired wolves in formal robes. The council, presumably, before the door swung shut. His gaze found her immediately. Something flickered across his features, surprise perhaps, or something warmer, before the mask of royal composure slammed into place. "Ilara, is something wrong with the children?" "The children are fine." She stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that weren't quite steady. "I need to speak with you, privately." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he nodded and gestured for her to follow him down the corridor. They ended up in a small solar overlooking the palace gardens, a feminine space, she realized with a start, decorated in soft blues and silvers. The Queen's rooms, perhaps, before she'd vanished. Kaelin seemed to realize it at the same moment. His jaw tightened as he looked around at the delicate furnishings. "This will have to do," he said shortly. "The rest of the palace has ears." "What's so urgent it couldn't wait?" Ilara took a breath. "Last night Ronan said something in his sleep. He said, 'Mama said the singing lady would come. Mama said to make sure she stays.'" She watched the words hit him, watched his expression shift from impatience to confusion to something harder. "Children have nightmares," he said. "They say things that don't mean—" "Your Majesty." She cut him off, too anxious for proper deference. "Think about it. Your queen needed a voice healer for her ritual. Aldrich as much as confirmed it yesterday when he said my kind was nearly extinct. She poisoned your children, left them to die in a specific location, and somehow knew that someone with my exact gift would find them. That's impossible. Is it?" She stepped closer, urgency making her bold. 3 years ago, I was rejected by my fated mate and exiled to a village less than a mile from where your children were abandoned. I've lived there ever since, hidden, unknown, just waiting. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. Waiting for what, Your Majesty? For 3 poisoned princes to fall into my lap? Kaelin's hands had curled into fists at his sides. "You're suggesting my wife orchestrated your entire life to bring you here? That she somehow arranged your rejection, your exile?" "I'm suggesting someone did." Ilara's voice cracked. "I don't know how or why, but nothing about my life has been coincidence. I've always known it, felt it. I just couldn't see the pattern until now." He was silent for a long moment, his wolf prowling behind his eyes. She could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical pressure, assessing her, weighing her words against everything he knew. "Why would Seraphina care about you?" he asked finally. "Why go to such lengths for a nobody Omega?" The words stung, even though she knew he didn't mean them cruelly. "I don't know. but I intend to find out. How? She hesitated. The palace library. There might be records, histories of voice healers, information about the rituals she's using. Something that explains why she needs me specifically. Kalen ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked less like a king and more like an exhausted man trying to hold too many pieces together. The library is open to you. Take whatever you need. He moved toward the door, then paused. Ilara, if you're right about this, if Serafina truly planned your involvement from the beginning, then you're in more danger than any of us realized. She won't have gone to this much trouble just to let you slip away. I know. Then be careful. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. My sons need you. They've been through enough loss. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in his vanished queen's solar with the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. The palace library was a cathedral of knowledge. Ilara had never seen so many books in one place. Shelves stretching toward the vaulted ceiling, ladders on brass rails, tables piled with manuscripts and scrolls. The air smelled of old paper and leather and dust, and the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. She started with the histories. Voice healers, she learned, had once been common among Omega kind, a gift passed through bloodlines, emerging in every generation. They had been revered in the old days, treated as sacred vessels of the moon goddess herself. Their songs could heal any wound, cure any poison, even, some texts claimed, bring the newly dead back to life. Then came the burning times. 200 years ago, a coalition of Alpha Lords had decided that voice healers were too powerful to be allowed to exist freely. They had organized hunts, dragging Omegas from their homes, testing them, and burning alive anyone who showed signs of the gift. Within a single generation, the bloodlines had been nearly exterminated. Nearly. Ilara turned pages with trembling fingers, searching for names, for any mention of survivors. The texts were frustratingly vague, written by the victors, no doubt, who had wanted to erase all memory of the healers they'd destroyed. But then, tucked into a crumbling volume of genealogies, she found it. Ilara Vance, last known vessel of the moon goddess's gift, burned at the stake in the village of Thornhaven, year 847 of the Wolf calendar. Survived by one daughter, an infant smuggled to safety by unknown parties. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Vance, her family name. She read the passage again, then again, her mind struggling to absorb what she was seeing. Ilara Vance. Ilara Vance. The names were nearly identical, and the gift, the histories said, passed through bloodlines. She wasn't just a voice healer. She was a direct descendant of the last vessel, the Omega, who had been burned alive 2 centuries ago for the crime of existing. The gift hadn't died with Ilara. It had survived, hidden, passed down through generations of Vance women who had learned to never, ever sing in public. Never sing where anyone can hear you, her mother used to say. Promise me, Ilara. Promise me you'll stay silent. She'd thought it was superstition. She'd been wrong. A sound behind her made her spin, her heart lurching into her throat. Lady Morgana stood in the library doorway. She was beautiful. There was no denying it. Tall and willowy, with hair like spun copper and eyes the colour of winter frost. She wore a gown of deep emerald that accentuated her pale skin and the elegant lines of her figure. And she was looking at Ilara with an expression of polite curiosity that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The Omega," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I've heard so much about you." Ilara rose from her chair, acutely aware of the difference between them. Morgana was everything she was not, noble, powerful, alpha. The kind of wolf who belonged in palaces, not scrabbling through dusty books looking for proof of her own cursed heritage. "Lady Morgana," she dipped into a curtsy as protocol demanded. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No, we haven't. The king has been preoccupied." Morgana moved into the library with the fluid grace of a predator, trailing her fingers along the spines of books as she passed. but I make it my business to know everyone who enters this palace, especially those who have caught His Majesty's attention." There was something in her tone, a sharpness beneath the velvet, that made Alara's wolf bristle. "I'm simply caring for the princes," she said carefully. "Nothing more." "Of course," Morgana smiled, showing just a hint of teeth. "The princes. Such sweet children. It's tragic what their mother did to them." But then, Serafina always was. Unstable. "You knew the Queen? We were raised together. Our families have been allied for generations." Morgana's frost-coloured eyes fixed on Alara's face with unsettling intensity. "I always knew she would destroy herself eventually. I just didn't expect her to take the children down with her." Alara said nothing, but her mind was racing. Lady Morgana's family controlled the kingdom's military. She'd overheard servants gossiping about it, and the council was pushing the king to take a new queen from a powerful allied pack. The pieces weren't hard to fit together. "You're very devoted to the princes," Morgana continued, circling closer. "It's almost maternal. Touching, really, for an Omega of your station. They've been through a trauma. They need stability. They need a mother." Morgana's smile sharpened. "A proper mother. Someone who can give them the guidance and protection only a Luna can provide." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "But I'm sure you already know that. After all, you're only here temporarily, aren't you?" Before Alara could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Lady Morgana, what a surprise to find you in the library." The Dowager Luna swept into the room like a storm cloud in silk. She was an older version of Kaelin, the same dark eyes, the same proud bearing, but where his coldness seemed like armor, hers felt like a weapon. She looked at Alara the way one might look at something unpleasant stuck to one's shoe. "Your Grace." Morgana dipped into an elegant curtsy. "I was just introducing myself to the king's new pet." "Indeed." The dowager's gaze swept over Alara with undisguised contempt. "The Omega who has bewitched my grandsons. Tell me, girl, what exactly did you do to them? What dark magic have you worked to make them scream for you and no one else?" Alara felt her cheeks flush. "I haven't done anything, Your Grace. I simply healed them when they were dying. The bond formed naturally." "Naturally." The dowager laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "There is nothing natural about an Omega, like you insinuating yourself into the royal family. You should be in the servants' quarters, scrubbing floors, not playing nursemaid to princes." "Mother." Kaelin appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Alara hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed him at all, and from the looks on the other women's faces, neither had they. "Kaelin, darling." The dowager's tone shifted instantly, honey poured over poison. I heard what you were just doing." He moved into the room, placing himself between Alara and the other two women with a casualness that somehow felt deliberate. "Alara is here at my invitation. She is under my protection. If you have concerns about her presence, you may bring them to me privately. You will not harass her in hallways like common bullies." The dowager's face went white with fury. Morgana's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her frost-coloured eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or reassessment. "Of course, Your Majesty," Morgana said smoothly. "We meant no offence. We're simply concerned for your well-being, and the children's, of course." "Your concern is noted." Kaelin's voice could have frozen fire. "Now, if you'll excuse us. Alara and I have matters to discuss." The dismissal was clear. The dowager looked like she wanted to argue, but something in her son's expression stopped her. She swept out of the library with Morgana trailing behind, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and simmering resentment. When they were gone, Kaelin turned to Alara. The anger in his face had softened into something more complex. Concern, perhaps, or frustration. "I'm sorry," he said. "My mother has never approved of anyone who doesn't meet her exacting standards. And Morgana," he shook his head. "She's been circling since Serafina disappeared. Her family sees an opportunity. She wants to be queen. She wants the power that comes with it. There's a difference. He glanced at the books scattered across Ilara's table. You've been researching. What have you found? Ilara hesitated. The genealogy was still open to the page about Ilara Vance, her ancestor's name stark against the yellowed paper. She could hide it, could lie, could protect herself the way she'd been doing her entire life. But the king had stood between her and wolves who wanted to tear her down. He'd defended her without hesitation. Perhaps he deserved the truth. I found out why Serafina needs me, she said quietly. My ancestor was the last known vessel of the moon goddess, the last voice healer before me. She was burned alive 200 years ago. The gift survived through her daughter, passed down in secret through my family line. She met his eyes. The ritual Serafina bought requires a vessel's voice to complete. Not just any voice healer. One of the goddesses chosen. One of Ilara's descendants. Kaelin's face had gone very still. The curse on my children is a trap. For me. The words scraped past the tightness in her throat. The children were never the true sacrifice. They're bait. She needed something to draw me out, to bind me to the ritual. She poisoned them knowing I would find them, knowing I would heal them, knowing the bonds I formed would make it impossible for me to walk away. She laughed bitterly. She's been planning this for years, maybe decades. Every terrible thing that's happened to me, the rejection, the exile, all of it, was designed to put me exactly where she needed me to be. Why? The word was raw, almost plaintive. Why go to such lengths? What does the ritual give her that's worth all this? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. Ilara gathered the books she'd been studying, stacking them with hands that trembled only slightly. I need to learn everything about my gift, what it can do, how to control it, how to fight whatever dark magic she's using. The blood moon is in 3 weeks. I have to be ready. Kaelin watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. You could run, he said finally. Take what gold you need and disappear. If you're not here, she can't complete the ritual. And leave your sons to die from a curse I helped create. She shook her head. No, I won't abandon them, even if staying kills me. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice, a glimpse of the man beneath the crown. You barely know them. I know they trusted me when they had no reason to. I know they call me the singing lady and ask me to braid their hair. I know their wolves recognize mine and mine recognizes theirs. She met his gaze without flinching. That's enough. The days that followed blurred together. Ilara divided her time between the triplets and the library, splitting herself between nurturing and research with a desperation that left her exhausted every night. The boys were thriving, their fevers gone, their appetites returned, their laughter echoing through the nursery in a way that made even the stone-faced guards crack smiles. She sang to them every night, lullabies that glowed golden in the darkness and kept the nightmares at bay. But underneath their recovery, she could feel the curse waiting. It was subtle, a shadow at the edge of her awareness when she touched them. A coldness that lurked beneath the warmth of their small bodies. The wolfsbane had been flushed from their systems, but Serafina's dark magic remained, coiled around their souls like a serpent waiting to strike. She found more texts about vessels, about the moon goddess's gifts, about the rituals that required sacred blood. The more she read, the more her horror grew. Serafina wasn't just trying to sever her mate bond with Kaelin, she was attempting to claim divinity for herself. The ritual would transform her into something beyond wolf, beyond mortal. A goddess in her own right, with power enough to remake the world in her image. The cost was 3 innocent lives and 1 sacred voice. Meanwhile, the palace politics swirled around Ilara like poison in water. The dowager made her disdain known at every opportunity, pointed comments about Omega servants who forgot their place, meaningful glances at the servants that made them hesitate before answering Ilara's questions, and whispered conversations that fell silent whenever she approached. Morgana was worse in some ways because she was subtler. She would appear at odd moments with offers of friendship, invitations to take tea, suggestions that she and Alara might become allies if only Alara would tell her what exactly she had done to capture the king's attention. And then there was Caelan. He came to the nursery every night after the council meetings ended, always with the excuse of checking on his sons, always staying longer than a simple check would require. He would stand in the doorway while Alara sang the triplets to sleep, his dark eyes watching the golden light that wrapped around them, his expression unreadable. But she noticed things too. She noticed the way his shoulders loosened when he heard her voice, as if some constant tension was finally allowed to ease. She noticed how he lingered to hear the end of each lullaby, even when the boys were already deeply asleep. She noticed the questions he asked her afterward, not about the children, but about her village, her healing work, what she missed about life outside the palace walls. She noticed the way her wolf stirred when he was near, reaching toward him with a longing she didn't want to examine too closely. He was still mated to Serafina. The bond might be poisoned, might be broken in every way that mattered, but it existed, and Alara had already been rejected by one fated mate. She wasn't foolish enough to let herself hope for anything from a king who was still legally bound to another. But hope, she was learning, didn't always ask permission. 2 weeks before the blood moon, everything changed. Alara was in the nursery, helping the triplets build a tower out of wooden blocks, when a servant burst through the door without knocking. "My lady." The woman's face was white, her voice trembling. "You must come. The king has summoned everyone to the great hall. There's been a message." The triplets looked up, their golden eyes wide with concern. Alara forced herself to smile at them, to keep her voice calm even as fear curdled in her stomach. "Stay here with Nanny Greta," she said. "I'll be back soon." Ronan grabbed her hand. "Promise?" "I promise." She followed the servant through corridors that seemed longer than usual, past clusters of nobles and servants all moving in the same direction, all wearing the same expression of barely concealed dread. By the time she reached the great hall, it was already packed, wolves in every corner, voices hushed, all eyes fixed on the dais where the king stood. Caelan looked like death walking. He held something in his hands, a small wooden box, lid open, contents hidden from view. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with a rage so profound it seemed to distort the air around him. "The message arrived an hour ago," he said, his voice carrying through the hall like a blade. "By Raven, addressed to me personally. The guards have already been questioned. No one saw who released the bird. No one knows how she obtained what she sent." He turned the box so the crowd could see its contents. 3 locks of hair, tied with ribbon, dark as midnight. Exactly the shade of the triplets' hair. The hall erupted in murmurs of horror and outrage, but Alara couldn't hear them over the roaring in her ears. Those were her boys' curls. She would recognize them anywhere. She had braided them, washed them, run her fingers through them while singing lullabies. Serafina had someone inside the palace, someone close enough to the children to steal locks of their hair without anyone noticing. Caelan's gaze found hers across the hall. She saw the same realization in his eyes, the same terrible understanding. "There was a note as well," he continued, his voice like cracking ice. "I will read it once, and once only." He unfolded a piece of parchment. His hands were steady, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. "She sings, I take. Your choice, Caelan." Silence crashed through the hall. Every eye turned to Alara. She felt their gazes like physical weight, the suspicion, the fear, the dawning realization of what she must be, what she must mean to the mad queen who had tried to murder her own children. The dowager's voice cut through the silence like a whip. "There it is," she said, triumph barely concealed beneath her horror. "The Omega is the key. Serafina wants her. Give her what she wants, and this ends." No, Kaelin's voice was absolute. Ilara is under my protection. I will not hand her over to be slaughtered. Then your children will pay the price. The dowager stepped forward, her face twisted with fury and fear. She has someone inside these walls, Kaelin. She can reach the princes whenever she wants. How long before locks of hair become something worse? How long before she takes what she truly needs? Morgana moved to stand beside the dowager, her frost-coloured eyes gleaming. Perhaps a compromise, she suggested smoothly. The Omega doesn't need to be given over. She simply needs to leave. If she's not here, Serafina has no reason to target the children. If she's not here, the curse will kill them. Kaelin's voice dropped to a growl. The bonds she formed are the only thing holding the dark magic at bay. Remove her, and my sons die within days. More murmurs, more chaos. Ilara stood frozen in the middle of it all, feeling the walls close in, feeling the trap that Serafina had built with such careful patience finally snap shut around her. She sings, I take, stay and doom the children to their mother's ritual, leave and doom them to the curse. There was no right choice, there was no way out, but as she looked at Kaelin across the crowded hall, at the king who had defended her, who came to hear her sing every night, who looked at her like she was both salvation and torment, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not run. Whatever came next, whatever Serafina had planned, Ilara would face it head-on. For the boys who called her the singing lady, for the wolf who had claimed them as her own, and maybe, just maybe, for the broken king who was starting to claim her too. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The palace became a fortress of suspicion. Kaelin ordered the gates sealed within an hour of reading Serafina's message. No one entered, no one left. Guards were doubled, then tripled, stationed at every door and window of the royal nursery. The servants who had access to the children were confined to their quarters, questioned one by one in a chamber deep beneath the palace where screams wouldn't carry. Ilara watched it all with growing unease. She understood the king's paranoia. Someone had touched the triplets, had been close enough to cut their hair while they slept, and the thought made her sick with rage and fear. But the interrogations were yielding nothing, and with each passing day, the tension in the palace wound tighter. Servants flinched when guards walked by. Nobles eyed each other with naked distrust. The triplets sensed the change and grew clingy, refusing to let Ilara out of their sight for even a moment. "Papa's angry," Ronan whispered to her on the third night, his small body pressed against her side. "His wolf is hurting. Can you sing to make it better?" "I don't know, sweetheart." She stroked his dark hair, her chest aching. "Some hurts are too deep for songs." But that wasn't entirely true, was it? She'd been studying her gift obsessively since finding the texts about her ancestor. The vessel's voice could heal wounds of flesh and spirit alike. It could soothe dying wolves and mend broken bonds. Some texts claimed it could even reveal truth, that the moon goddess's vessels had once served as oracles, their songs drawing secrets from shadows and lies from the lips of the guilty. If she could learn to do that, she wouldn't need brutal interrogations. She could simply sing the traitor out of hiding. The idea terrified her. Using her gift openly would reveal exactly what she was to a court already suspicious of her presence. If the wrong person learned the truth, if the Dowager or Morgana discovered she was a vessel, she'd be dead before the blood moon rose. But the alternative was waiting, watching, letting Kaelin tear his household apart while Serafina's spy remained hidden, ready to strike. The triplets deserved better than that. She waited until the boys were deeply asleep, their breathing soft and even in the darkness of the nursery. The guard Kaelin had assigned to them, a massive wolf named Gareth with kind eyes and hands scarred from 100 battles, stood watch outside the door. He'd proven himself trustworthy over the past days, gentle with the children, respectful to Ilara. She didn't think he'd betray her, but she also knew she couldn't tell him what she was about to do. She moved silently through the connecting door to her own chamber, then gathered what she needed: a candle, a bowl of water, and the ribbon that had bound one of the stolen locks of hair. The ribbon had been overlooked in the chaos, a simple strip of blue silk that Ilara had found caught in Dorian's blankets, left behind when the spy cut his curls. It was enough. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the candle flickering before her, and placed the ribbon in the bowl of water. Then she closed her eyes and began to sing. This wasn't a lullaby. It wasn't a healing song. It was something older, something she'd found in the most ancient of the library's texts, a revealing melody that asked the goddess to illuminate what was hidden. The words weren't words at all, just sounds, vowels and consonants that resonated in her chest and spread outward like ripples in still water. Golden light bloomed behind her eyelids. She saw the ribbon floating in darkness, trailing threads of shadow that led away through the palace like a spider's web. She followed them with her mind, letting her voice carry her through corridors and around corners, past sleeping servants and watchful guards, until she found the source. A small room in the servants' wing, a young woman kneeling before a hidden shrine, her lips moving in prayers to something that was not the moon goddess. Ilara recognized her. She was Lady Morgana's personal maid, a mousy girl named Bess who had served tea when Morgana confronted Ilara in the library. Unremarkable, easily overlooked, the perfect spy. The vision shifted, and Ilara saw more. Letters passing between Bess and someone outside the palace, written in code. Gold changing hands in shadowed doorways. And behind it all, a presence that made Ilara's blood run cold, the dark magic that had poisoned the triplets, coiled around Bess like chains, binding her to Seraphina's will. The song ended. Ilara opened her eyes, gasping, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had her traitor. Gareth didn't ask questions when she told him they needed to wake the king. Perhaps he sensed the urgency in her voice. Or perhaps he simply trusted her judgment. Either way, within the hour, Ilara found herself standing in Kaelin's private study, watching his face darken as she explained what she'd discovered. "You're certain?" he demanded. "Morgana's maid?" "I saw her, felt the dark magic binding her." Ilara hesitated. She may not be acting of her own free will. Seraphina's curse could be controlling her. "That doesn't make her less dangerous." Kaelin was already moving toward the door. "Guards, bring me the servant called Bess and summon Lady Morgana to the Great Hall. Now." The next hour was chaos. Bess broke down the moment she was dragged before the king, sobbing and begging for mercy. The dark magic's hold on her shattered under Kaelin's alpha command, and she confessed everything. The letters, the gold, the way Seraphina's voice had slithered into her dreams and made her believe she had no choice. "She said she'd kill my family," Bess wept. "She said she'd burn my village if I didn't do exactly what she wanted. I didn't want to hurt the princes. I never wanted—" "Enough!" Kaelin's voice cut through her sobs like a blade. "You'll be confined until we determine the extent of your betrayal. Take her." As the guards dragged Bess away, the great hall doors burst open and Morgana swept in, her copper hair wild, her frost-coloured eyes blazing. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "My maid has been arrested. On what grounds?" "On the grounds that she's been corresponding with Seraphina for months." Kaelin faced her, his body rigid with barely contained violence. "Your maid, Lady Morgana, in your household, under your supervision." Morgana went very still. For a long moment she simply stared at him, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Then, to Ilara's astonishment, she laughed. "You think I'm working with her," she said. "You actually think I'm helping my sister destroy everything." The hall fell silent. Ilara felt the shock ripple through the assembled wolves, guards and servants who had gathered to witness the confrontation, all frozen by that single word. Sister. Serafina is your sister. Kaylin's voice was dangerously quiet. Half-sister. Same mother, different fathers. Morgana's composure had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. Our mother was a practitioner of dark arts before she married into nobility. When she died, she left her grimoires to Serafina, the legitimate heir. I got nothing but warnings and nightmares. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Kaylin's face. I've spent years trying to undo what our mother started. Serafina was always unstable, always hungry for power she didn't deserve. When I learned she'd bought a blood moon ritual from our family's forbidden archives, I knew I had to stop her. Her voice broke. I came to this palace to protect your children, Kaylin, not to harm them. Then why didn't you tell me? The words tore out of him, ragged with betrayal. Why the secrets, the scheming, the political maneuvering? Because I didn't know who to trust. Morgana's control shattered completely. Serafina has allies everywhere. She's been planning this for years, maybe decades. I couldn't risk exposing myself until I knew who was truly loyal to you and who was feeding information to her. And my maid, she continued bitterly. I had no idea she was compromised. Serafina must have gotten to her before I even arrived at court. The perfect way to frame me if her plans started to unravel. Ilara's mind was racing. Something about this felt wrong, not Morgana's words, which rang with desperate truth, but something else. Something she'd glimpsed in her vision that hadn't made sense at the time. The letters Bess had been passing, the coded messages. They hadn't gone to Serafina directly. They'd gone to someone inside the palace. The letters, she said slowly, drawing every eye in the hall. Bess wasn't sending them outside the walls. She was delivering them to someone here. Someone who was passing them along to Serafina. Morgana's face went pale. That's not possible. I checked. You checked the obvious routes. Ilara's gift was stirring again, golden light flickering at the edges of her vision. You didn't check family. The hall doors opened. The Dowager Luna stood in the entrance, her face composed into an expression of maternal concern. What's happening? I heard shouting. She stopped. Ilara was singing. It wasn't a conscious choice. The Revelation song had started pouring out of her the moment she'd seen the Dowager's face, and now golden light was flooding the hall, wrapping around the older woman like chains. The Dowager's mask crumbled, replaced by something feral and hateful as shadows peeled away from her form, revealing the dark magic that had been hiding underneath all along. No, she snarled, trying to pull away. You can't. This is impossible. Mother! Kaylin's voice was barely human. What have you done? The truth came spilling out, not from confession, but from the light itself, images forming in the golden glow for all to see. The Dowager whispering poison in a young queen's ear, year after year, convincing Serafina that her husband would never truly love her. The Dowager suggesting dark magic as the only escape from an unwanted bond. The Dowager connecting her daughter-in-law with practitioners of forbidden arts, knowing exactly what would happen, wanting it to happen. She took everything from me, the Dowager hissed, her composure finally shattering completely. When Kaylin came of age, he took the throne and sent me to the dower house like a used-up broodmare. I gave him life. I ruled this kingdom for 15 years, and he discarded me without a second thought. So you destroyed my marriage. Kaylin's voice shook with a rage that made the air itself tremble. Poisoned my wife. Nearly murdered my children. Your children were never supposed to die. The Dowager's laugh was ugly, bitter. Serafina was supposed to take them, raise them as her own, and return in triumph when you were broken enough to accept her terms. The ritual was my idea, a way to sever your bond and bind her to something more. Controllable. But she got greedy. She always was weak. The golden light flickered and died. Ilara swayed, exhausted from the effort of maintaining the Revelation song. Gareth caught her before she could fall, steadying her with careful hands. Kaylin stood frozen in the center of the hall. staring at his mother like he'd never seen her before. Perhaps in some ways, he hadn't. "Take her," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Confine her in the tower. She'll face trial when this is over." The dowager screamed curses as the guards dragged her away, but Elara barely heard them. She was watching Kaelin's face, watching something vital crumble behind his eyes. He turned and walked out of the hall without another word. She found him hours later in his private chambers. The door was unlocked. Unusual, perhaps a sign that some part of him wanted to be found. The room beyond was dark, lit only by dying embers in the fireplace, and Kaelin sat in a chair before the hearth with a bottle of wine in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "You should be with the children," he said. "The children are asleep. Gareth is watching them." She moved closer, her heart aching at the devastation in his voice. "And I was worried about you." "Don't be." He laughed bitterly. "I'm the Alpha King. I've survived worse than discovering my mother tried to destroy my family." "Have you?" The question hung in the air between them. Kaelin finally looked up, and Elara saw what the dim light had been hiding, the tracks of tears on his face, the red rims of his eyes, the utter brokenness of a man who had lost everything he'd believed in. "My mother hated me," he said quietly. "She smiled at me for 30 years, told me she was proud of me, advised me on matters of state, and the whole time she was plotting to ruin everything I loved. My wife—" His voice cracked. "Serafina was never stable, but I thought if I tried hard enough, I could make her happy. I thought the bond would grow into something real. Instead, my mother was pouring poison in her ear from the beginning." Elara knelt before him, taking the wine bottle from his unresisting hands and setting it aside. "None of this is your fault, isn't it?" His dark eyes were wells of pain. "I should have seen, should have known. What kind of alpha misses betrayal from his own mother? What kind of mate fails so completely that his wife would rather sell their children than stay bonded to him? The kind who was manipulated by someone he trusted." She reached up and touched his face, a liberty she never would have taken before, but something had shifted between them. Something had cracked open. "You didn't fail, Kaelin. You were betrayed. There's a difference." He stared at her for a long moment, something raw and desperate flickering in his expression. Then, slowly, he reached out and traced the line of her jaw with trembling fingers. "Why do you care?" he whispered. "After everything, the suspicion, the blade at your throat, the way everyone in this palace has treated you. Why are you here?" Elara didn't have an answer, or rather she had too many answers, and none of them were safe to speak aloud. So instead, she did the only thing she knew how to do. She sang. Not a revelation song, not a healing melody, just a lullaby, the one her mother used to sing when Elara was small and frightened, when nightmares felt too big and the world too dark. The words were simple, the tune simpler still, but the golden light that accompanied them was warm and soft, wrapping around Kaelin like a blanket. He fought it at first. She could feel his wolf resisting, too proud to accept comfort, too broken to believe it was real. But the song persisted, gentle and relentless, and eventually his eyes drifted closed. He slumped forward, his head coming to rest in her lap. She kept singing, stroking his dark hair the way she stroked the triplets when they had bad dreams, and felt something inside her own chest begin to shift and realign. She shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be touching the king like this, singing him to sleep, feeling her wolf reach toward his with a longing that bordered on physical pain. But she couldn't make herself stop. When the song finally ended, she sat in the darkness with the Alpha King's head in her lap and wondered what she'd just done. She must have dozed, because she woke to pale dawn light streaming through the windows and Kaelin stirring against her. He sat up slowly, confusion flickering across his features as he registered where he was, who he was with. Elara braced herself for awkwardness, for the mask of royal composure to slam back into place. Instead, he went very still. "Something's wrong," he said. What? She straightened, alarm flooding through her. Is it the children? No. He pressed a hand to his chest, his expression shifting to something like wonder. The bond. The mate bond with Serafina. It's gone. Ilara's blood turned to ice. What do you mean gone? I mean it's not there anymore. He looked at her with wide, bewildered eyes. I've felt it for 10 years, this constant weight, this chain tying me to a woman who wished me dead. And now it's just broken, like it was never there at all. It shouldn't be possible. Mate bonds only broke at death. That was one of the fundamental laws of wolf kind. The moon goddess created bonds, and only the goddess could sever them. Unless. The vessel's voice, the goddess's chosen, the power to mend what was broken and break what was corrupted. She'd sung to him with all her heart, poured every ounce of comfort and care into that lullaby, and somehow, impossibly, she'd severed a bond that should have been eternal. I did this, she whispered. My song. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to. Ilara. Kaelin caught her hands, his grip warm and solid. Look at me. She looked, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a light, a hope, a reaching toward her that made her wolf keen with desperate longing. The old bond is broken, he said softly, but something new is forming. I can feel it. Right now, reaching toward you, asking if you'll accept it. A second chance bond. The rarest gift the goddess could bestow. A new beginning for wolves who had lost or been betrayed by their first mates. And it was reaching toward her. We can't, she said, even as every fibre of her being screamed to accept. The blood moon is in 3 days. Serafina is coming. We don't have time for... We have exactly enough time. He brought her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I'm not asking you to complete the bond right now. I'm asking you to acknowledge it exists, to give me hope that when this is over, when Serafina is defeated and my children are safe, you might consider... A horn sounded from somewhere outside. They both froze. A second horn joined the first, then a third, the alarm sequence that meant danger at the gates. Kaelin was on his feet in an instant, all vulnerability vanishing beneath the mantle of the Alpha King. Stay here, he commanded. Don't leave this room until I... The door burst open. Gareth stood in the doorway, his face grey with shock. Your Majesty. At the gates. You need to see this. They were at the palace walls within minutes, Kaelin's guards flanking them on all sides. Ilara shouldn't have come. She knew that, but she couldn't make herself stay behind, couldn't bear to wait in ignorance while the final act of this nightmare unfolded. What she saw when she reached the battlements stole the breath from her lungs. An army filled the valley below. Hundreds of wolves, maybe thousands. Their eyes glowing with the sickly purple light of dark magic. They moved in perfect unison, unnatural and wrong, puppets dancing on strings held by the woman who stood at their head. Serafina. The former queen was barely recognizable. The dark magic had transformed her, her beauty twisted into something terrible, her body wreathed in shadows that writhed like living things. Power radiated from her in waves that made Ilara's skin crawl. But her smile was exactly as Ilara remembered from the portraits in the palace halls, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. Kaelin, darling, Serafina called, her voice carrying impossibly across the distance. Did you miss me? Serafina. Kaelin's voice was steady, but Ilara could feel the tension coiling through him. You're not welcome here. Leave now, and I'll let your army live. So brave, so noble. Serafina laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. But I'm not here for you, beloved. I'm not even here for our children, though I'll collect them before I leave. No, I'm here for her. She pointed directly at Ilara. Did they tell you what you are, little vessel? Did they explain why I went to such trouble to bring you here? Serafina's smile widened. The ritual needs 3 royal bloods and 1 sacred voice. I have the bloods. Now I need the voice. I'll never help you, Ilara shouted back. Whatever you're planning, I'll die before I let you. Die? Seraphina's laugh rang across the valley. Oh, sweet child, you won't die. You'll serve, just like Mother always intended. The world seemed to stop. Mother! Ilara's voice came out strangled. What are you talking about? Seraphina's expression shifted to something almost like fondness. Hello, little sister, she said softly. Did you really think Mother hid you to protect you? She hid you to protect me, to keep the goddess's vessel safe and hidden until I was ready to claim her power. You were never meant to have a life of your own. You were born to be my instrument. The words slammed into Ilara like physical blows. Sister, mother, born to serve. Now come home, Seraphina finished, extending one shadow-wrapped hand. We have so much work to do. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The world had turned to ash and ruin around her, and still Ilara couldn't move. Sister. The word echoed through her mind like a death knell. Seraphina was her sister, her mother, the woman she'd mourned for 17 years, whose face she could barely remember, had given birth to both of them. Had hidden Ilara away like a weapon to be kept safe until needed. Everything she'd believed about her life was a lie. I can see you're struggling with this, Seraphina called from below, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Would it help if I explained? Mother was a vessel like you, like me. But she was weak. She fell in love with some nobody alpha and let sentiment cloud her judgment. When she realized she was pregnant with you, she knew you'd be the true vessel. The gift always passes to the youngest daughter. Ilara's hands were shaking. She gripped the battlements until her knuckles went white. I should have been the one, Seraphina continued, and now the sweetness curdled into something bitter. I was raised to be the vessel, trained, prepared, promised power beyond imagining. But Mother knew. She knew the goddess would choose you instead, so she hid you away in that pathetic village and bound your powers until you were old enough to survive them. The fire, Ilara whispered. They told me my parents died in a fire. Mother sacrificed herself to complete the binding. Seraphina's laugh was ugly. Noble to the end. She thought she was protecting you from me. Instead, she just delayed the inevitable. Kaelin's hand closed around Ilara's arm, warm and steady. Don't listen to her. She's trying to break you. She's succeeding. Ilara's voice came out raw. Everything, my rejection, my exile, finding the children, she planned all of it. The curse wasn't just about dark magic, it was about me. Making me manifest my full powers so she couldn't finish the sentence. Consume them, Morgana said quietly from behind her. The alpha female had appeared on the battlements at some point, her frost-coloured eyes fixed on her half-sister below. In our bloodline, a vessel can absorb another vessel's gift through ritual sacrifice. It's forbidden magic, the darkest kind. Seraphina wants to become the most powerful wolf in existence, and she needs your voice to do it. You knew. Ilara turned on her. You knew we were sisters. I suspected. Morgana's face was tight with old pain. Our mother had many secrets. When I learned Seraphina was hunting a hidden vessel, I started searching for you. I'd hoped to warn you before she found you, but I was too late. Below, Seraphina raised her hand. The corrupted wolves behind her stirred, their purple glowing eyes fixed on the palace walls. Enough family reunion, she called. I'll give you 1 hour to decide, little sister. Surrender yourself willingly, and I'll let the children live. Fight me, and I'll tear this palace apart stone by stone until I drag you out myself. She turned and walked back toward her army, shadows swirling around her like a living cloak. The war council assembled in Kaelin's study within minutes. Ilara stood at the window, unable to look at the others. At Morgana, who had known and said nothing. At Kaelin, whose new bond pulsed warm and insistent beneath her ribs. At Gareth and the other guards who were watching her like she might shatter at any moment. "We have approximately 3,000 soldiers within the palace walls," Gareth was saying. "Seraphina's army numbers twice that, and they're enhanced by dark magic. In a straight fight, we lose." "Then we don't fight straight." Morgana spread a map across the table. "The corrupted wolves aren't acting of their own will. They're puppets, controlled by Seraphina's magic. If we can break her hold on them, they'll scatter." "And how do we do that?" Kaelin demanded. "We target Seraphina herself." Morgana looked at Ilara's back. "A vessel's voice can do more than heal. It can judge. It can unravel dark magic at its source. If Ilara can get close enough to sing against Seraphina directly—" "No." Kaelin's voice was absolute. "I won't use her as a weapon." "She's already a weapon." Morgana's tone was sharp. "She's been a weapon since she was born. The only question is whether she chooses to wield herself or lets Seraphina do it for her." Ilara finally turned from the window. "She's right. Ilara, I'm the only one who can stop her." She met Kaelin's eyes, saw the fear and fury warring in their dark depths. "My voice broke your mate bond. It revealed your mother's treachery. If I can learn to use it as a weapon, I can tear apart whatever dark magic is controlling those wolves and destroy Seraphina's power at its source. And if you fail? Then we're no worse off than we are now." She smiled bitterly. "She's my sister, my blood. Maybe that gives me some advantage." The study door burst open. A guard rushed in, breathless and wild-eyed. "Your Majesty, the Dowager. She's trying to escape through the servants' tunnels." Kaelin's face went cold as stone. "Bring her to me." They found the Dowager Luna in the wine cellars, dressed in servant's clothes, a bag of jewels clutched to her chest. She didn't beg when the guards dragged her before her son. She stood tall, defiant, her eyes blazing with hatred that had been festering for decades. "So you caught me," she spat. "Congratulations. What now? Will you execute your own mother before the whole court?" "I should." Kaelin's voice was ice. "You tried to destroy my family. You manipulated my wife into madness. You nearly murdered my children." "Your children," the Dowager laughed. "Do you know how many times I held those boys and imagined smothering them in their sleep? 3 heirs. 3 obstacles between me and reclaiming what was mine. If Seraphina hadn't been so greedy, if she'd just followed the plan to make me suffer." Kaelin stepped closer, towering over the woman who had given him life. "The plan to break me so completely that I'd accept any terms to get my children back. Was that always your goal, Mother? To destroy your own son?" "You destroyed me first." The words tore out of her like poison from a wound. "I was regent for 15 years. I ruled this kingdom, made it strong, built alliances that you squandered with your soft heart and your pathetic attempts at peace. And how did you repay me? You took the throne the moment you came of age and sent me away like a servant. I sent you to a comfortable retirement. I visited you every month. I consulted you on matters of state." Kaelin's voice cracked. "I loved you. Love," she spat the word like a curse. "Love is for the weak. Power is all that matters. And you, my darling boy, were always too weak to do what needed to be done." Silence hung in the cellar, thick and suffocating. The guards shifted uneasily, waiting for their king's judgment. Ilara stepped forward. "Your Majesty." She kept her voice soft, careful. "May I speak?" Kaelin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. She moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the rage radiating from his body. "Execution would be just. No one would fault you for it. But becoming the kind of king who kills his own mother, even a mother who deserves it, will destroy something essential in you. She doesn't deserve mercy." "No, she doesn't." Ilara met the Dowager's hateful gaze without flinching. "But mercy isn't about what people deserve, it's about who you choose to be." She touched Kaelin's arm. "Your children will grow up hearing stories about this moment. What do you want those stories to say?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. Strip her of her rank and her wolf. Exile her to the northern wastes, where she'll live out her days with the knowledge of everything she's lost. He looked at his mother one last time. You're no longer my family. You're nothing. The dowager screamed as the guards dragged her away, but Kaelin didn't watch. He turned and walked out of the cellar without a backward glance, and Ilara followed, her heart aching for the broken man beneath the crown. They had less than a day to prepare. Morgana worked with Ilara through the long hours, teaching her the old songs, not lullabies, not healing melodies, but war cries. Songs of judgment, songs that could tear dark magic apart at its seams. The vessel's voice was never meant only to heal, Morgana explained, her own voice rough with exhaustion. The moon goddess created your gift to maintain balance, to mend what was broken, yes, but also to destroy what was corrupted. Seraphina has twisted herself beyond recognition with dark magic. When you sing against her, that magic will fight back. It will try to consume you. How do I stop it? Anchor yourself to something stronger than her darkness. Morgana's eyes flickered to the door, where Ilara knew Kaelin was waiting. Something worth fighting for. The triplets found her that evening, as she sat in the nursery trying to center herself for the battle to come. They crawled into her lap without asking permission. Ronan on one side, Caspian on the other, Dorian pressed against her back. Their small bodies were warm, their wolves reaching for hers with innocent trust. Are you scared? Ronan asked. Yes. She saw no point in lying. But I'm going to fight anyway. Because you're brave, Caspian said solemnly. Papa says brave people are scared, but they do hard things anyway. Your papa is right, Dorian pressed his face against her shoulder. We love you, he whispered. We love you like we loved Mama before she got sick. Maybe more. The bonds between them pulsed with golden warmth, those connections she'd formed when she'd sung them back from death's door. She'd thought they were a complication, a trap Seraphina had laid to bind her here. Now she realized they were something else entirely. They were her anchor. I love you too, she said, gathering all three of them close. And I promise, whatever happens tomorrow, I will protect you, with everything I have. The blood moon rose red and swollen over the kingdom. Kaelin's army met Seraphina's on the fields below the palace, steel clashing against corrupted claws, war cries drowning out the screams of the dying. Ilara watched from the walls, her heart in her throat, waiting for the moment Morgana had described. There, a gap in the battle lines. A path cleared toward the place where Seraphina stood, directing her puppet army. Now, Morgana said. Ilara ran. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, soldiers on both sides parting around her without seeming to notice. Morgana's concealment spell wouldn't last long, but it didn't need to. She just needed to reach her sister. The ruined church of St. Aldrich loomed ahead. Somehow, impossibly, the battle had pushed toward the very place where this had all begun. Seraphina stood in the center of a ritual circle chalked into the ancient stones, the blood moon hanging heavy overhead, shadows writhing around her like living things. She smiled when Ilara stepped through the broken doors. I knew you'd come, she said. You couldn't resist, could you? The chance to be the hero, to save everyone with your precious voice. I'm not here to be a hero. Ilara's voice shook but didn't break. I'm here to end this. End this? Seraphina laughed. Little sister, I've been planning this for 30 years. Do you really think you can stop me with a few weeks of training? I don't need to stop you. Ilara spread her hands. I just need to break your hold on those wolves outside. Without your army, you're nothing. Seraphina's smile flickered. You can't. The binding magic is too strong. Ilara opened her mouth and sang. It wasn't a lullaby. It wasn't a healing song. It was a war cry that tore from her chest with all the fury and love and desperate hope she'd been carrying since the night she'd found 3 dying children in this very church. The golden light that accompanied it blazed like a sun, flooding the ritual circle, crashing against Seraphina's darkness, like waves against a cliff. The dark magic fought back. Ilara felt it clawing at her, trying to consume her gift, trying to drag her down into shadows. But she held onto the bonds pulsing beneath her ribs. 3 children who loved her, who trusted her, who had called her the singing lady and asked her to braid their hair. Their innocent love amplified her power in ways Morgana had never described, feeding strength into her voice. Seraphina screamed. The shadows around her began to tear apart, dark magic unraveling thread by thread. Outside, Ilara could hear the sounds of battle changing. Corrupted wolves collapsing, freed from their puppet strings, while Kaelin's army surged forward with renewed vigor. "You can't do this!" Seraphina shrieked. "You're supposed to be weak. Mother bound your powers. You shouldn't be able to—" "Mother bound my powers to protect me," Ilara said, her voice ringing with harmonics that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. "But she couldn't bind my heart. And that's what you never understood, Seraphina. The vessel's gift isn't about power. It's about love." The dark magic shattered. Seraphina staggered, suddenly ordinary, suddenly diminished. For a moment she looked almost like the woman she might have been, the sister Ilara might have known if fate had been kinder. Then her face twisted with hatred, and she pulled a blade from her sleeve, black metal, dripping with something that smelled like wolfsbane and worse. "If I can't have your power," she hissed, "I'll take what you love instead." She lunged, not toward Ilara but toward the doorway, where 3 small figures had somehow appeared. The triplets. They must have followed her, must have slipped past the guards, must have— Kaelin intercepted Seraphina with a roar that shook the walls. The poisoned blade meant for his children sank deep into his chest. Ilara caught him as he fell. Blood poured through her fingers, too much blood, spreading across the ancient stones in a pool of crimson. Kaelin's eyes were already glazing, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his wool flickering like a candle in a hurricane. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Seraphina was laughing somewhere behind her, cackling about victory even in defeat, but Ilara couldn't hear her. All she could see was Kaelin dying in her arms. All she could feel was the new bond between them screaming with agony. She'd sung 3 children back from the edge of death. She'd shattered an unbreakable mate bond with a lullaby. She'd torn apart dark magic with a war cry. Now she had to do the impossible. She had to sing an Alpha King's soul back from death itself. The song that rose from her throat wasn't one she'd learned. It wasn't one anyone had taught her. It came from somewhere deeper than training, deeper than memory, a melody that seemed to exist at the very foundation of the world, woven into the fabric of life itself. Golden light blazed around her, brighter than anything she'd ever produced. She felt her gift burning through her, consuming itself to fuel this final desperate miracle. The pain was excruciating. She could feel her voice tearing, her power draining away like water through sand. But Kaelin's eyes cleared. His breathing steadied. The wound on his chest began to close, dark poison dissolving in the light of her song. Behind her, Seraphina's laughter turned to screams as the last remnants of her dark magic burned away, taking her with them. Ilara didn't turn to watch. She couldn't. All of her focus, all of her remaining strength was pouring into the man in her arms. "Come back," she sang without words. "Come back to me. Come back to your children. Come back." The last note left her lips, and the world went dark. She woke 3 days later in the king's chambers. The ceiling above her was painted with stars and moons, familiar now from the night she'd spent singing the triplets to sleep. Soft light filtered through silk curtains, and she could hear birds singing outside the window. She was alive. That seemed impossible somehow. She'd burned through everything she had felt her gift consuming itself like a fire devouring its own fuel. She'd been certain she would die, but here she was, warm and comfortable with 3 small bodies curled around her on the massive bed. The triplets. They were sleeping, their faces peaceful, their breathing soft and even, safe, whole. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd nearly died for, gathered in this one perfect moment. She tried to say their names and found her voice wouldn't come. Panic flooded through her. She tried again, tried to speak, tried to make any sound at all, but nothing emerged except a faint rasp. Easy. She turned her head to find Kaelin sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, jaw shadowed with stubble, clothes rumpled like he hadn't changed in days. But he was alive, breathing, looking at her with an expression that made her heart stutter in her chest. A scar stretched across his chest where the poisoned blade had struck, visible through the loose lacing of his shirt. A permanent mark. A reminder of how close she'd come to losing him. "Your voice will come back," he said quietly, reaching out to brush hair from her face. "Aldrich says you burned through most of your power saving me. It needs time to regenerate." She opened her mouth, tried to ask questions, managed only another faint rasp. "Don't strain yourself." He smiled. The first real smile she'd ever seen from him, warm and soft and full of something that looked like wonder. "Serafina is dead. Her corrupted wolves are freed. The kingdom is damaged but healing. And you." He took her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. "You brought me back from death, Ilara. You sang my soul back into my body." Tears streamed down her face. She couldn't speak, couldn't tell him everything she wanted to say, but he seemed to understand anyway. "The bond is complete," he whispered. "I felt it when you sang me back. You gave me everything you had, and something inside me gave everything in return." He brought her hand to his lips. "We're mates, Ilara. True mates. Not the arranged disaster I had with Serafina, but something real, something chosen." The triplets stirred around her, small bodies pressing closer. "Singing Lady's awake!" Ronan cried, his face splitting into a grin. "Papa! Papa! She's awake!" And then she was being hugged from all sides, 3 small boys and 1 alpha king, all clinging to her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She couldn't speak, couldn't sing, couldn't do any of the things that had defined her for so long, but for the first time in her life, she didn't need to. She was home. 6 months later, the throne room was packed with wolves from every corner of the kingdom. Ilara stood at the end of the long aisle, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to still them. She wore white silk embroidered with golden thread, a gown fit for a queen, which was what she was about to become. The triplets led the procession, throwing flower petals at her feet with more enthusiasm than precision. Ronan kept stopping to examine particularly interesting blossoms before his brothers dragged him forward. The crowd laughed, charmed by the little princes who had survived so much. At the far end of the aisle, Kaelin waited on the dais. He wore his crown today, a circlet of silver and moonstone that caught the light with every movement. But it wasn't the crown that made him look like a king. It was the way he held himself, the quiet authority that radiated from every line of his body, the love in his eyes as he watched her approach. The ceremony was traditional, ancient, the same words spoken at royal bondings for 1,000 years. Ilara's voice was still soft, not the powerful instrument it had once been, but it was strong enough for this, strong enough to speak her vows, to accept the crown Kaelin placed on her head, to become what she'd never imagined she could be, the Alpha Queen. Morgana stood in the crowd, smiling genuinely for the first time since Ilara had met her. Gareth wiped suspicious moisture from his eyes. Even the servants were crying openly. When Kaelin kissed her, long and deep and full of promise, the crowd erupted into cheers that shook the rafters. That night, after the feasting and the dancing and the endless stream of well-wishers, Ilara found herself alone with her new family. The triplets had insisted on sleeping in their parents' chambers tonight, a special exception for a special day. They were curled together on the massive bed, already drowsy, fighting sleep because they didn't want to miss anything. Kaelin sat beside them, one hand resting on Dorian's back, watching Alara with the same wonder he'd shown every day since she'd woken from her 3-day sleep. "Will you sing to us?" Ronan asked sleepily. "Please? A lullaby?" Alara hesitated. Her voice wasn't what it had been. The power she'd once wielded was diminished. Transformed by the sacrifice she'd made, she wasn't sure what would happen if she tried to sing, but these were her children, hers now in every way that mattered, and they were asking. She opened her mouth and sang. The melody that emerged was different from before, softer, gentler, no longer a weapon but something quieter, more intimate. The golden light that accompanied it was faint, barely visible, but it was there. She was still a vessel, still touched by the moon goddess's gift. But now she was something new, a vessel who had chosen love over power, a vessel whose voice was meant for lullabies, not war cries, a vessel who had found her home. The triplets drifted to sleep, small faces peaceful, small hands reaching for her even in their dreams. Kaelin drew her close, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You never told me," he murmured against her ear. "Told you what?" "What Aldrich said when he examined you this morning." She smiled, took his hand and pressed it against the slight swell of her belly that she'd been hiding beneath her gown all day. His breath caught. "The moon goddess rewards those who use their gifts for love," she whispered. "At least that's what Morgana says." He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes shining with tears he wasn't trying to hide. "A baby?" "A baby." He kissed her then, not the passionate kiss of new mates, but something deeper. The kiss of a man who had lost everything and found it again. The kiss of a king who had finally discovered what really mattered. Around them, the palace settled into peaceful quiet. The kingdom that had been torn apart by darkness was healing. The wolves who had been corrupted were free. And in this room, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to have, Alara felt the last broken pieces of herself finally come together. She had been rejected, exiled, hunted, and nearly destroyed. Now she was queen. She didn't sing at her coronation. Her voice wasn't ready for crowds and ceremonies yet. But here, in the quiet of her chambers, with her sons sleeping and her mate holding her and new life growing beneath her heart, she sang the only song that mattered. A lullaby for her family, a promise for the future. They called her the Singing Queen, the Omega who brought the Alpha King to his knees, not with submission, but with a voice that could raise the dead and heal the broken. And every night, the palace halls echoed with her lullabies, a sound that meant the kingdom was safe, the children were loved, and the king had finally found his true mate. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you.